Good morning, everybody. I am pulling up the presentation for today, so bear with me one moment. I'd like to get started by, there we go. I'd like to get started by diving right in and just revisiting some things that I promised you we'd revisit as part of today's webinar. I see that somebody, oh, okay. So an anonymous attendee said, "We cannot see your screen, it is black." Yes, I knew that, but then you said, "Oh, it works now, so that's perfect." Yeah, I was just trying to get everything pulled up. So thank you so much for letting me know that. It's always good to know when we're doing these that, you know, what you can see and what you can't see, because sometimes from our end, it doesn't work as well as what we think it is. All right, so here's what it is we're going to cover. Before we do anything, I want to make sure that we review our survey results. And the survey that I'm talking about, of course, is a survey that I had sent out to all of you who have registered for past or present Ask HR webinars throughout this 12-week series we've done. First of all, can you even believe that it's been 3 months? I know I can't believe it's been 3 months. This is the fastest 3 months that I've ever experienced since the pandemic really started going full steam ahead. But then in other ways, it's the slowest. I'm sure all of you can agree to that as well. So we're going to review the survey results based upon the feedback that you shared with us. And then we're going to talk about what's next, because obviously after today, this series will be wrapped, but we aren't going to leave you high and dry. I wanted to make sure that we had a very thoughtful approach to what it was we decided to do to continue to give you the support you need. But of course, I recognize that we've kind of gotten our faithful webinar participants, which have hovered between, on average, between 50 and 75 participants every single week. I wanted to make sure that we got you to the next season, let's say, of support that you're going to need throughout this ongoing pandemic. And then, of course, for the final 45 minutes, we're going to cover the 4 topics you see there. I wanted to make sure that we left you with some really helpful information, some really good things that are substantive for you to think about as we, you know, as we continue down this journey and as we prepare you to really be able to stay ahead of all the unknowns that are happening while also having your business flourish or your organization flourish. So that's what it is we're going to be covering today. This is just the information that all of you have seen a million times before. We don't need to spend time on it. The only reason I show that is so that you can appreciate the perspective that I bring to the table, as well as my colleague, Aaron Phillips, the perspective he brings to the table. He and I work together as partners in the human capital side of our practice here at Decision Associates, and we are not attorneys, we are not doctors, we are not psychologists. Although it feels like all of us have been trying to wear many hats, doesn't it, since all of this happened. But again, I just like you to see this so that you can appreciate where we're coming from in terms of the industries we've worked within, our credentials, our work experience, as we give you the things to think about throughout each of these webinars. So let's talk a little bit about the survey results. And what I wanted to do as we talk about these is I wanted to let you know that we use the feedback that you gave to us as part of this very brief survey we sent out throughout last week and this week to help us understand where you need the most support. And we might have thought we had an idea, but you really, really helped us to understand exactly where you need support. And you also helped us to understand what you got the most out of as part of this series, and you know, what would make the most sense in terms of helping to stay connected with you after today ends, since this is our last session in this 12-week series. So before we do anything, let's just take a look at the survey respondents. So there were 40 of you who responded, and I'll tell you that the industries represented, you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, the majority were from manufacturing, 18% from nonprofit and library. I bundled those together. About 10% from human services and mental health, followed by 8% in transportation, distribution, banking, financial services, and government, 5% from oil and gas, and 3% from what I would categorize as other. So that is what was captured in terms of the perspective that you'll see from the responses I'll be sharing with you from the survey. Of the organizations who responded, you can see the size of the organizations based upon what is in the bottom left blue box. So the majority of respondents came from an organization that had between 21 and 50 employees, followed closely by employer size of 51 to 100. And then, of course, followed by 20% with 1 to 20 employees and 14% with 101 to 250. We had, I'm sorry, that should be a percent, but 5% of you came from an employer of the size of 251 to 500 employees. Now, this is something I thought was really interesting, and I think you'll find it interesting as well. If you take a look at the roles each of you play in your respective organizations as you join us week to week, and as you're sitting here with us today, the vast majority of respondents, if this is reflective of who's with us today, are responsible for HR, but yet they don't necessarily have the, the degree or the official training to do so. It's something that has been placed in your lap. And I will tell you, that is something that has been very common, especially in smaller organizations. And I feel as though maybe it's not the best thing for those of you who've had that placed in your lap, and for the employees and for the employers to get the most out of that role. Maybe it hasn't been the best thing, but at least you've been able to, quote unquote, get away with it, right? Up until this darn pandemic. But now that this pandemic has hit, and the sweeping legislation and the constant changes and the huge draw and taxing energy it's taking from the people serving these roles, never before has it been as important as it is now to get the people who are in those roles trained and supported so that they aren't flying blind. It's a very dangerous time to fly blind, both from a liability perspective and just from a, sustainability perspective for the organization. So we want to make sure that the support we've been giving from week to week has been helpful, and also the support that we find a unique way to offer after today is helpful. By the way, before I continue talking about results, I don't want to forget to say this. I hope everybody knows, for those of you who've been a part of our webinars, if you have a quick little question you'd like to ask, or you want to float something by us, please don't hesitate to do that. We don't want you to feel like you're being completely dumped, because that's not the case. We still are here for you, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So 20% of the respondents were either the owner, CEO, or president of their for-profit business. 18% were either the ED, CEO, or board member of a nonprofit organization. 15% were responsible for overseeing the HR function, but they had the related degree and certifications. 3% were vice presidents in the corporate suite, and 1% represented those who were responsible for health and safety. As far as the number of Ask HR webinars attended, 45%. Every single week almost they attended, but 40% attended 2 to 5 weekly webinars. 10% of you didn't miss even one webinar. So for those of you, you're probably on today, thank you so much. And 5% had an opportunity to attend one webinar. So now on a scale of 1 to 5, we wanted to know how useful you found our time together week to week. And it was, 5, of course, would be the most helpful, 1 would be not helpful at all, and then everything in between. So 53% of you found our time together to be very, very useful. And that felt great to see that, because I know we've put a lot of time into it and trying to give you information that's extremely timely and relevant and relatable to what it is you're trying to navigate. 40% of you found them to be extremely helpful with a rating of 5, and 7% found it to be somewhat helpful with a rating of 3. So we were very pleased to hear that. We also wanted to know how many of you had a chance to participate in other COVID-19 related webinars to get the support and guidance you need elsewhere. And 65% of you yeah, you attend other webinars, and that's great. There are so many great resources out there. 35% of you have not attended other webinars, and you've been turning to Decision Associates and the time we've spent together week to week for your main source of guidance. Now, that leads us to the next question. We wanted to know, comparatively speaking, how useful and relevant you found the information that we covered. And, 58% of you found it to be more useful and relevant than what you, got elsewhere. And of course, this goes without saying, we only took a look at the of the 65% of you who said that you attended elsewhere. 39% said that you found it to be about equally as useful and relevant, and 3% of you felt as though what we offered was somewhat as useful and relevant, comparatively speaking. So that gives you an idea of how things have been going. And it's kind of a report card, a snapshot of all the time we've been spending together for the past few months. Now let's transition and talk a little bit about what's next after today, because as you know, it's a wrap, right? At 12 o'clock when we're done today, it's bittersweet. I really am going to miss the time that we spend together. I'm sure many of you will also, but we wanted to talk about what you can expect after this. And what I want to share with you is something that we are going to be offering. And again, this is based upon the input and the feedback you have shared with us. It's based upon what you have told us would be helpful for you. And what we've come up with is something we're calling the new future of work COVID-19 peer group. And I have a lot more words than I typically like to have on a slide for you to look at as we talk through what that means, because I want to make sure you understand exactly what it is, who it's geared towards, and how it's going to differ from the time we've been spending together on a week-to-week basis. One thing to throw out there, of the 40 respondents who responded to the survey, 21 of you expressed interest in joining this peer group, which is great. Don't worry if you are on this webinar live, or if you are someone who's going to be taking advantage of listening to it later when we share the recorded version. Don't worry that maybe you didn't have a chance to respond to the survey and indicate your interest. It is not too late. I'm actually going to be sending out another notification, not only to those who definitely indicated interest, but also one last shot over the bow to give everybody who's been a part of these webinars an opportunity to get more information if they'd like to join it. But what it will be is it's going to be a virtual peer group that is going to meet monthly. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a deeper dive. So we're going to have expert guest speakers. We're going to share best practices. We're going to be providing regular compliance guidance from legal professionals, and chances are we're in talks with them now, but it's looking likely that it will be with both Mark from the Pennsylvania law firm based out of Erie, Knox, and also Amanda Lau, who is the New York State-based attorney who works with Phillips Lytle based out of Buffalo, New York. But we're going to have regular participation from legal professionals who will be giving you guidance, and also an access to a huge library of resources that we will not only continue building for you, but also that we have already begun to compile. So that's what it would be. And it's really geared towards anyone who is looking at this as a way to be, forward thinking, people who want to stay ahead of the best practices, and people who want to be competitive in terms of, not you personally to be competitive, but people who want to use the leadership role that they've been granted to, and whether you're officially trained as an HR professional or not. The point is, everyone who is a part of these webinars and everyone who we are speaking to right now as you're listening to this, you all have been given the responsibility of overseeing the human capital within your organization. In other words, the people and the compliance related aspect of everything. And as you know, it's tied closely to how sustainable your organization is going to be and how well you're going to be able to survive as an organization. So this is really for anyone who wants to be forward thinking, stay ahead of everything that's happening, people who want to have a really firm understanding of the constantly changing compliance related expectations that are being thrust upon you as an employer. But you get all this without obviously, having to pay a very costly, fee each time you join a larger organization that offers legal guidance and things of that nature. So this is something that's intended to be for a fee, but definitely affordable and giving you what it is that you need. And the way it's different is that, like I said earlier, it's a much deeper dive. So it's going to be not only giving you a deeper dive into those issues to help you survive and thrive, not only during the pandemic, but beyond, but it's also going to give all of you, because it's a cohort setting. So you all will have that confidential group of trusted peers where you can share things that are on your mind and disclose, hey, I don't really know how to handle this. Do you have any pointers? Things that you wouldn't necessarily want to say or fess up to your employer, right? As you're trying to figure all this out, but you have a trusted network of peers who are part of this with you, as well as professionals such as myself, such as Erin, such as the attorneys who will be participating, as well as the guest expert speakers that we will have joining us for this as well. And you're also going to learn new skills and really just gain instantly a nice network of people that you can lean on throughout the work week. So as far as the time commitment, these meetings will be held, like I said, virtually 2.5 hours on a monthly basis. And the format is going to be highly engaging. Let me just tell you one thing. First of all, we have been blown away by the participation and the just how much so many of you have given to communicating with us throughout each week and faithfully joining each of these webinars. But I want to tell you, we here at Decision Associates are investing in our own development. And I'm actually going to be going through a certification course myself to be a certified virtual trainer, and specifically becoming an actual expert. So I am super excited because this 2-week certification course is going to be taking place in the beginning of August, and you will get the benefit of this as peer group members, because I can promise you it's going to be a very engaging format. It's going to be much more engaging than this, where mostly I'm just speaking to you or our guest speakers are speaking to you. But we'll have breakout conversations. We'll have, like I said, discussion, interactive polls, live Q&A, and all sorts of things that are really going to make it so that you almost forget you're doing it virtually. And what's nice about it is it doesn't matter where you're from. You can be a part of this. So, travel time and the expense of travel doesn't have to factor in. In addition to that, you will get updates, support resources throughout the weeks in between the monthly meetings. I'll tell you, there's going to be a kickoff orientation for all peer group cohort members in early September. And then we'll also have a social networking event in the winter. We're hoping, God willing, with everything going on with COVID, that those 2 events can be in person. That's our plan. But after that, all of the sessions will be monthly through June 2021. You can see how it differs. We kind of talked about that a little bit already, but is it free? No, it is not. It is a paid offering. And again, it's really intended for those who recognize and value the investment of positioning your organization and positioning yourself to really succeed and flourish and survive during these uncertain times. So more to come, more to follow, but I just wanted to let you know that is something that we're offering for those of you who may be interested. We understand it's not for everyone, and that's okay, but that is one of the offerings. And if you're one of the 21 who said you wanted to do it, you'll be hearing from us. The other thing we're offering, excuse me, is a free 1-hour consultation that we are only offering exclusively for any of you who have been past or present webinar registrants. And we want to help you explore any potential project-based needs that you think you may have. We understand that a lot of you might not know what you don't know. We understand a lot of you might be thinking, gosh, I don't know if I can necessarily do the peer group, but yet I know we need some support. I don't even know where to begin. That's okay. We're happy to talk with you. No pressure whatsoever. Zero commitment in terms of, oh, you meet with us for an hour, you have to engage with us. That's not the case. We will honestly and ethically and, from a spirit of helpfulness, point you in the direction that we recommend you take. And if that means it would be sensible to engage with us, if we think that we can help you, we'll tell you. If we recognize, hey, we just need to give you a couple little resources and then you're well on your way, we'll tell you that as well. But if you want to have a free 1-hour consultation, we are happy to meet with you, and you would meet with either Erin or myself or both of us, and our contact information is obviously right there. So those are the things that we are going to be offering after today and after this series wraps. There may potentially, in fact, I'm sure there will be a time or two where we do have a pop-up webinar as things really continue to evolve, but it won't be on a weekly basis once again, because again, we feel as though you're going to get a lot more out of it doing the things that we just talked about. All right. So now let's talk about some compliance updates. And I wanted to say, hey, hooray, Erie, Pennsylvania, Erie County, Pennsylvania, you've gone green today, you've done it. And what that means to you, you can see right here on the screen. Now, I've included the website address for specific links that would be helpful for you as we give you the guidance. But please know that as far as workplace restrictions, it's not a free-for-all. You still, of course, have to follow the guidance related to cleaning and social distancing. And we also can't emphasize enough how important it is. You are strongly being encouraged to continue allowing your employees to telework and you yourself to telework wherever possible. Everybody, unless your head has been in the sand, which I know none of your heads have been in the sand because you're so busy, you all have been seeing on the news the spike with this virus is spreading throughout the country. And the additional restrictions that are likely going to come as a result of that, as you'll see when I give the New York State update in a second, they're going to continue, right? So, and not to mention, you don't want to, of course, jeopardize the health, safety, or well-being of your employees or your clients or customers. So please, please, if at all possible, and you know by now who and what positions can work remotely and what can't, please consider doing that as we get through this pandemic. The link right there shows you the specific, business and building safety requirements that any of you with in-person operations have to follow. I know many of you are super excited because now restaurants and bars are opening at half capacity. Indoor malls can reopen. Aren't you lucky? In New York State, we're not that lucky. And think of all the things you can do. You can actually go work out again at the gym. You can go to the theater. You can go to the casino. You can have gatherings of 250 people or less. Again, isn't it funny how just over the border, because I live in New York State, about a 45-minute drive from my office in Erie, how different it is. But Erie, Pennsylvania, you've done it, you've gone green. If you have any other questions about this, please feel free to visit that link that I have included on this slide deck, or feel free to get in touch with me, or I know Mark would be happy to answer questions as well. So now let's talk about our friends in New York State. And New York State just hot off the press, issued an executive order called Executive Order 205, and it went into effect yesterday. What this executive order states is that there's a mandatory 14-day quarantine restriction on any travelers from designated hotspot states. Now, as of I guess it was technically this morning because it was after midnight when I was updating this slide. So as of the time that I updated this slide, the relevant travel advisory states are listed here, okay? But I can promise you it's going to change as the COVID-19 cases increase in many, many states. I will tell you that the quarantine order, it only applies if you've been in one of the impacted states for more than 24 hours. So if you're just quickly passing through, traveling from one state to the next, it doesn't apply. There is an exemption for essential workers that fall within the 3 categories listed here. But let me just say one thing, because yesterday I was fielding questions from New York State employers who said, well, gosh, I have, I work in a business that's deemed essential, and I have employees deemed essential who have scheduled vacations, specifically in Florida or North Carolina. Does that mean that they can still travel to those hotspots and they don't have to abide by the 14-day quarantine restriction? No, vacation travel by an essential employee is not covered in this exemption, but rather if you are doing work-related travel for your essential position in one of the impacted states, then it would be exempted. But even still, you have to follow certain restrictions and rules. Please note, I highlighted it in yellow. Violators of this executive order face a $10,000 fine. Now, I know a lot of you on these calls have employees who work both in New York office locations as well as Pennsylvania office locations, and a lot of you on this call are strictly in New York. It's very important you understand the workplace and the employer implication of this. I put together some things that I wanted to just be sure to review with you. So forgive me for looking down, but let me just share something very quickly. All right. So one thing that I wanted to share with you is that you as an employer of New York State employees, so an employer within New York State, or if you, like many of you on this call, have locations in New York as well as Pennsylvania, you have to understand that employees who quarantine upon entering New York after travel to any restrictive state, they might be entitled to paid leave during the quarantine period. And that would be covered under the Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which is known as EPSLA, and or the New York State COVID-19 sick leave law. So I wanted to make sure you understood that. Both of these laws require covered employers to provide paid leave to employees who are required to quarantine pursuant to a state-issued COVID-19 quarantine order, which of course, this would be that. But let me just say one thing. Now, you've all been put in touch with the contact information for an excellent attorney, Amanda Lowe in New York State. Use her. Call her, email her if you have any questions, or if you have another, New York State attorney that you already know and trust who specializes in labor and employment law, call them. Because if you're considering whether or not to pay your employees impacted by this order under these leave laws, you're definitely going to want to seek guidance from your attorney. This is hot off the press. It's still unfolding in real time. You don't want to just shoot from the hip and hope you're doing it right, because the violation is $10,000. And I will also tell you that New York State is really heavily pushing, and encouraging people to report those that they think are violating it. All right. Okay. So that's it as far as the compliance updates. Now let's shift. Let me just do a quick time check. Okay, perfect. We're doing great with timing. Now let me shift directions and let's talk about the prepared topics that we had. The first prepared topic is, where do we start, right? How can we find a way that's different from what we had done before to do business during times of upheaval? And I didn't say during the pandemic. I decided to say during times of upheaval, because as you can see, it's a tornado of chaos. Literally at the same time, we have a pandemic, we have a recession, we have protests, we have constantly changing legislation that not only differ from state to state, but also change from week to week, day to day federally. And then we have riots. Never in any of our lifetimes as business owners, as business leaders, as nonprofit leaders, have any of us ever experienced a time like this. So I wanted to make sure that for our final webinar, I gave you some really helpful things to think about as you are going to continue having to find new ways to do business. So one thing that I thought was really interesting, and this is according to a study that was released by SHRM just in June 2020, so it just happened, right? I'm sure a lot of you are just pining for the days where you can get back to normal levels of profitability. And they estimate, based upon the study that they did, that almost half of the businesses in the US with 500 or fewer employees, so again, that would be probably everyone on today's webinar, you can reasonably expect that it will take 6 months or more for your organization to return to normal levels of profitability. That's a long time. And that's just what you expect it will take. One thing that we've learned is to expect the unexpected, right? Ever since March, it's been nothing but constant unexpected changes, which is why we want to make sure that you're thinking about what you need to think about to help your organization survive and thrive. I'm going to tell you right now, if any of you have leaders in your organization who you've known have kind of been flying under the radar, they're kind of apathetic and just going through the motions, they're in their positions because their butts happen to have been on the seat in the bus for a long time, and they're not really that great, they are a liability for you. I'm going to tell you that you either want to invest in training them, coaching them, having a serious come to Jesus conversation with them and positioning them for success, because the key to your ability to survive and thrive, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit organization, is to get rid of any notion of lazy leadership. This is a very dangerous time for any organization to try to take shortcuts or to try to come up with a quick fix. And so what's going to be important for you is to surround yourself with leaders who are not only open and willing, but who also have the appropriate skill set to be agile, to be flexible, to be adaptable, to reevaluate and constantly be open to reevaluate the old way of doing business pre-COVID-19 and take a look at what we can do differently, right? And you need people who are collaborative. If you don't have a culture that matches that, or if you don't have people in key leadership roles who possess those traits and who believe in those ways of operating, it's going to be harder for your organization to survive and thrive. And I'm just being very honest. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but I am also trying to be a realist. But the great news is there are things you can do. And you know what else? There are organizations, some of you on this call, some of you on these webinars, you get it. You have people that are on your leadership team who get it. You have presidents and business owners who get it. And not only will you survive, but you're actually probably going to grow exponentially after all is said and done. And what it takes for you to find a new way of doing business is to take a fresh look. Take a fresh look at your technology processes. Take a fresh look at your revenue streams. Safety measures, obviously, we've all been forced to do that, but take an even closer look. There has to be a new and different way to deliver the services to your customers, or to deliver, the interaction that your clients are, so dependent on. There has to be a way that you can take a fresh look at the way you've been doing things and come up with how to do it in the new normal. It's kind of like, I'm sure all of you have heard, if any of you have heard, like, AD, I forget what that stands for. How about this? BC, before Christ, or AD, after, right? So it's kind of like pre-COVID-19, post-COVID-19. Completely different. So think about what employment practices you can take a fresh look at, and just some examples I threw out there. Maybe it's sensible to introduce hazard pay. Maybe it's sensible, if you haven't done so already, to look at job sharing. Maybe it's sensible to really embrace and commit to remote work, at least until something is figured out to get us through this hurdle of the pandemic. One benefit that you might want to consider offering: home office stipends, right? So these are some things that I'm just throwing out there as examples for you to look at. The other thing that I wanted to make sure I leave you with as a parting thought for today's webinar is really reflecting upon, hey, you've had a lot of employees who've gone remote. Can they go back? And I was just reading in the news yesterday, there was a story, I believe it was in, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, I'm trying to remember. And then there was also a story local in the Buffalo News that was focusing upon employers who are really, really struggling because they've allowed employees to go remote. And now they're asking them to come back. In fact, you know, one of the employers that is having a tough time with this, you're going to chuckle, the New York State government. About 3,000 employees within the New York State government are pitching a fit, and they are refusing to come back to work in the office out of fear of safety concerns, and by arguing and saying, listen, we have proven that we can do our jobs remotely. There's still no vaccine developed for this pandemic that we're in the midst of. I'm not doing it. So some of you on this call have probably already started to experience some kickback, and it's something that I know employment experts have been predicting for the past couple months. I would concur with that. If you're not experiencing it, great. But here are some eye-opening statistics that I thought you'd be interested in knowing. And again, this is according to a study that was done in April of about 2,400 US employers. So since March 2020, I mean, this is just mind-blowing how overnight things have changed. 88% of US employers have encouraged or required their employees to work from home. Remote workers are 35 to 40% more productive than people who work in corporate offices. And also too, they are predicting that in order to retain staff, okay, organizations should expect that 75% of their staff will ask to expand their remote work hours by 35%. So, hey, you know, and I was just talking to a client the other day, hey, you know, how about if I just come back 1 day a week or 2 days a week? And it could be because of fear or concern, but another real reason is because of childcare issues, right? A ton of people have lost their childcare options because of the pandemic we're in the middle of, and they're trying to find a way to juggle and figure out a way to please you as their employer and get their job done and earn a living, but also take care of their children who are under the age of 18. 74% of companies plan to permanently shift to more remote work post-COVID. And there are many reasons for that. Many of them have recognized that there is a cost savings. Many of them have recognized that they actually have been innovative and they can find a way to better serve their clients and customers in a virtual world. Lots of different reasons. Many have also figured out, wow, I can recruit from a much higher caliber pool of talent here for these positions, because now the world is my oyster. I can have someone working for me that I'm not requiring to move here to our physical location. So now I can attract people who live in maybe larger, more metropolitan areas to work for my small organization in Northwestern Pennsylvania that otherwise in the past, they wouldn't have looked twice at us. So here are some considerations that we want to leave you with. First of all, those of you on this call, whether you, you know, if you're on this call, you're on it because you have some sort of decision-making responsibility and you have some sort of influence on how the organization leads its people and serves its clients and customers through this pandemic. So it is your responsibility to take a look at your systems, take a look at your infrastructure, take a look at your policies, and take a look at what they were from before the pandemic, because I'm going to guess that in many cases, they're no longer going to be the best options for your workforce or for you or for your clients or for your customers. And also consider that there's a very strong likelihood that your employees, not all, but at least some, they might not really be open or tolerant of going back to work and the way things were, because they've now proven that it can work, or at least they feel that they've proven it can work. So you want to make sure, and I highlighted it in yellow, that you figure out how you can have your culture adapt to keep the best talent. The best of the best who work for you, they have more choices now. So let's say they want to work remote, right? And for whatever reason, it's not sensible for your organization. Please be aware that so many organizations, they're already there. They get it. They see the value. And so even though unemployment is higher, for top talent, the ones that you really don't want to lose, who are saying, hey, I want to work remotely, they do have more choices now. Does that make sense? Because they can look and they can expand and they can, apply for things all over the place. So if you are looking to keep your A players, please make sure, not just for remote work, but for everything you're doing, make sure that you are agile and you're adapting and you're flexible and you're evolving to everything that's happening in the ever-changing landscape. All right, ethical considerations. So we want to make sure that you are positioned ethically to get back to business as usual. And all of you on this call are at varying stages of reopening, right? I know Erin and I, one thing that we share is a very strong emphasis on ethics. And that is one of the reasons why we work so well together. And that is one of the things that we very much, help to instill in all of our clients' minds. So please keep in mind as we prepare to wrap today, there is zero playbook for what you're going through right now. And I don't think it can be lost upon us that what all of us are juggling with, and it's definitely not lost on Erin and I, who are entrusted by a lot of you to answer questions and to provide guidance. All of us are basically playing in a game with no playbook, with super high stakes. And we're all just doing the best we can with trial and error. Any of us who think we can go at this alone without constantly, educating ourselves, re-educating ourselves, pairing up with other organizations or resources to help us navigate it, are playing a dangerous game that could potentially lead to more error than if you had opened your mind to utilizing other resources. So I know that those of you on this call, most are not in a position to wait indefinitely for science to figure it out, right? This COVID-19 thing out. You've got to survive. You're in survival mode. And obviously all of us are dealing with very minimal consensus from various health experts, leaders within our government agencies. And so in a literal sense, the choices that you're making now in how you reopen are literally impacting the lives and livelihoods of your employees. So I know you know it because you say it, and we all say it, hey, it's not as easy as flipping a switch, but are we really acting in a way to back up what we know? So one thing I wanted to throw out there for you to think about is there are a lot of ethical considerations for you to think about. So first of all, you're reopening, even if those of you on today's webinar have reopened, your reopening is not over. It's going to extend over the course of time that this pandemic plays out. And why am I saying that? Because as we're starting to see in other states, the cases are spiking and lowering and spiking and lowering. So what's going to happen is you're going to constantly have to be in a position to reevaluate your plan of action as all of this unfolds and reverse course or hit the pause button or fast forward the various stages of your reopening. All right. So there will come times where you have to decide, you know what, I think I'm going to have to reinstate these particular practices or this protocol related to social distancing or how we do our operations. And it's not just about the science behind it. It's not just about the profit. It's not just about, what the economy is dictating. So we have for you right here an ethical framework, just 4 simple things highlighted in orange that will help you not only for reopening during this pandemic, but to be honest, it will help you as a leader too, in anything that you're doing, to make sure that everything you do follows an ethical process. And if you are an organization and if you're a leader who cares about ethical outcomes for your clients, for your employees, for the families of the employees, and for the families of the clients and customers who rely upon the services that they entrust you to provide, or the products. If you're an organization who cares about ethical outcomes, the only way to have an ethical outcome is to follow an ethical framework. We're all about simplification here, so I love to keep things simple. And these 4 very specific items that we'd like you to think about, if you follow this as your ethical framework, you will have ethical outcomes. So even though we don't know the ultimate outcome of how this pandemic's going to shake out, I can guarantee you, and you can guarantee your employees, and you can guarantee their families, and you can guarantee your customers that the outcome will be ethical if you follow this framework. So the first is, find a way to get input from your employees and to engage with your employees. Not only does this help to minimize misunderstanding and also a lack of support, but also you're going to undoubtedly hear fresh ideas and perspectives. They're your front lines, right? They're your front lines. So they're going to give you insight that you otherwise couldn't possibly have because you're not in their shoes. And that will not only lead to a higher acceptance of your new normal, but also to a better outcome. The second thing is to constantly seek the input of a diverse set of experts. That's much what we've tried to do for you for these weekly webinars, and what we're shifting towards, of course, with the peer group that we talked about earlier. But seek that input from a diverse set of experts. Do your due diligence as a leader. Get the data, get the guidance, listen to the opinions, and that will help you to be in a position to make the best decision for your organization. Also, to make sure you communicate and over communicate in a very clear way with your employees, with your stakeholders, about the basis of the changes within the policies or the practices that you have. You want to be completely transparent. You want to be completely clear, because all of them have something called a BS meter. All of us on this call have it too, right? You can tell if someone's not telling you everything. And the second you recognize that someone's not telling you everything, you get really scared. And when you get scared, you start to act in ways that aren't going to help your organization to move forward. So be honest with them. Tell them what you know. Tell them what information you gathered and used to help you make the decisions that you made. Be upfront with them. Don't BS them about the costs and the benefits, the pros and the cons of the changes that you're making. So be really, really careful not to sugarcoat, but to be honest. And then last but not least, constantly reassess. Constantly reassess your policies. Constantly reassess your situation, because if you turn a blind eye, you're going to miss the boat and there will be unintended consequences. So please make sure you do that as well. All right, before we wrap, some of you did have some questions that you had sent to me. And I will tell you that the most common question that I've gotten is surrounding the issue of vacation time. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes right now to talk about how to handle and navigate requests for vacation when we are in the midst of a pandemic and some of your employees are requesting to take vacation time at destinations that are deemed hotspots. Now, if you're in New York State, we already talked about the brand new requirement that was just passed down from Governor Cuomo yesterday. But if you're not in New York State, it still impacts you and you're still worried. So a lot of you want to know what you can and can't do. We have talked about it with Amanda and Mark on past webinars, but it is a question worth revisiting because I've been getting hit with a lot of these questions from a lot of you. So let me just help you with this, and forgive me for looking down. I made some notes for myself, didn't have time to throw them up on a slide. So as far as people, getting back up and running and getting ready to go on vacation, One thing that I want you to think about is that it's really, really important to have a policy in place, if you don't have one already, that advises employees not to travel, for any personal related travel to destinations that the CDC deems as a hotspot, right? Um, you also, I know we're not talking about vacation, or we're not talking about work related travel, but I just want to mention, in case you didn't know this, you're going to want to prohibit work related travel to those places, whether you're in New York or not. It's not safe. There's no reason. Nothing is worth jeopardizing the life of any of your employees or any of the clients or customers that you're serving. Okay. So that definitely should be a policy we're recommending, to prohibit work related travel to those hotspots. One thing too, a lot of you have been asking, well, can I require my employees to quarantine for 14 days after they come back if they still say, hey, you know what, thanks very much, Elizabeth. We see that you requested and you advised us against traveling to the hotspots, but we already had a vacation booked and we're going. If you are an employer who's not in New York State, because you already know you have to require it, if you're an employer in Pennsylvania, can you have the option of requiring for them to quarantine for 14 days? And the answer is absolutely, you can. You can require them upon their return that they have to self-quarantine for 14 days. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that there is differing opinion as far as the sensibility of that. Some of you on this webinar have differing opinions about, yeah, I really want to do that, or oh no, I don't. Again, if you're in New York State, you don't have an option anymore because Governor Cuomo has made that easy for you. They will be quarantining, or you and they will face a $10,000 fine. Don't think it's worth it. But one thing that's really important is, as you're thinking about this, make sure you know that in the state of Pennsylvania, you have the option, you have the choice as an employer to make your employees or require them to use PTO or paid vacation time in any way that you want. So you can choose to have them do that. So, it's very important to know that, sure, you can require them to use their PTO, but if you have an explicit policy, so check your handbook. If you have an explicit policy in your handbook that prevents you from being able to use their PTO for anything other than what they specifically have requested and that you've approved, then you can't do it. You have to follow your policy. But barring anything in your handbook that states you can't do it, you can require them to use their PTO. But you also want to be thoughtful of, from an employee engagement perspective, what type of impact that could have. In New York State, for those of you who are trying to navigate this new, this new requirement passed on by Cuomo effective yesterday, in New York State, you absolutely can require your employees to use their PTO during the 14-day self-quarantine. One thing to keep in mind is, like I said earlier, it could be eligible for some of the paid leave, both under the, federal and New York state laws. So if you're trying to navigate this new legislation that was just passed yesterday by Cuomo, this new executive order rather, call I'm talking about New York employers, call Amanda Lowe, and I will once again share with you her contact information when I send out today's webinar recording, and have her help you navigate that. Or if you have your own attorney in New York State who's expert at New York State employment legislation, have them help you navigate it, because this is brand new, this is unfolding. So I guess the biggest thing I wanted to make sure all of you know is, yes, you can require that they use their PTO for self-quarantine. You can require in Pennsylvania that they self-quarantine when they come back. You cannot forbid somebody from going on a vacation to one of those locations, either in New York or Pennsylvania. You can't forbid people and hold them hostage. So at the end of the day, they have their own free will. The only difference between New York and Pennsylvania is that in New York, Governor Cuomo has now issued a mandate that they have to self-quarantine for 14 days. In Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf has not issued a mandate. So it's up to you and your discretion as an employer if you would like them to do that. And you can have them use their PTO time. So that's all I have. It has been awesome having all of you spend time with me and with Erin and Mark and Amanda and all of our guest speakers from week to week. This 3 months has flown by. It warms my heart to hear from so many of you and to see the high numbers of people that register from week to week. I know you've gotten a lot out of this. If you want to continue getting more guidance or support, keep in mind the 2 different options we have. I'm going to be sending out more email correspondence later today, letting you know about how to get in touch with us to do one of those 2 things. But it's been great, and please stay healthy and stay tuned because we will definitely have some more webinars here and there that will pop up throughout this pandemic. But thank you for your faithful participation. Stay well.